Hey everybody, I am Brady Briggs. Welcome to another episode of the Combat Logic. Today, we're talking about UFC 274. It just went down on May 7th, Saturday night. And to be honest with you, this was a really, really stacked card that didn't quite live up to the hype. I will say that the fights that delivered really delivered, but there's just a number of them that didn't. So let's go on to this. The early prelims, throughout the first four bouts, nothing spectacular happened. Journey Newson picked up his first win inside the UFC. He did knock out the Domingo Pilarde maybe a year or so back, but that one was overturned because he tested positive for marijuana. And he got his first win inside the UFC. That was cool to see. Fernie Garcia, his opponent, he's also one to watch. That kid's got a lot of potential. But Journey Newson, man, he's so small, okay? He is tiny. I would really like to see him at 125 pounds. And he also threw a lot of kicks that just take a lot of energy to throw, like a lot of wheel kicks, didn't land a single one of them. I'd like to see him tighten up his strategy a little bit, but he looked good. Andre Fialho knocked out Cameron Van Camp in the first round, midway through the first round. And this was really impressive to me because, dude, Andre Fialho has done really, really well since coming to the UFC. He is the one that knocked out James Vick in James Vick's first fight outside the UFC. Remember when James Vick went on like a 5-fight losing streak? Actually, a 4-fight losing streak. He got knocked. He came into his fight with Justin Gaethje at 13-1. Got knocked out by Gaethje. Lost to Paul Felder. Almost got knocked out in that fight, but didn't. He made it the distance. Paul Felder also dropped along in that fight. That might be why he couldn't finish him. Dan Hooker starched him. Nico Price starched him. Like, all these are KO losses. He also got KO'd by Beneil Dariush and knocked out on the Ultimate Fighter in the one loss he had on that show. So he left the UFC at 13-5, getting knocked out in 3 of his last 4. And then he fights for ex-MMA, where he's been knocked out by Andre Fialho. Not a lot of people know that. Andre Fialho is the man that knocked him out once he left the UFC. Nonetheless, he came to the UFC not that long after, and he lost to Michel Pereira earlier this year in January. But he rebounded with a knockout over Miguel Beza, one of the higher touted prospects in the welterweight division, and now Cameron Van Camp. So he's already had 3 fights this year, guys. And Michel Pereira is technically undefeated in the UFC, and I'm going to tell you why. So he knocked out Danny Roberts in his debut, a huge upset. And then he lost to Tristan Connolly in his next fight, in a fight he just didn't. Like, dude, go watch that fight. You'll see exactly why he lost. He used way too much energy, and it didn't work out for him. He got tired and was beat by a natural featherweight, considering. He then lost to Diego Sanchez by disqualification in a fight he was, I wouldn't say dominating, but certainly controlling. And that was in the 3rd round. Honestly, should have went to a technical decision. You have 3 rounds to score, should have went through the cards, but it didn't. And since then, he's won his last 4 straight, okay? Last one over Andre Fialho. Since then, Fialho's fought twice, won twice, both by first-round knockout. He's now 16-4 as a pro with 13 knockouts. I am super, super excited to see what's next out of him. Blagoy Ivanov and Marcos Rogério de Lima. This was a good fight early on. This was a really good fight early on. The first half of it, it was a good fight. And after that, it just became a snooze fest, a typical Blagoy Ivanov fight. And I'm not trying to shit on Ivanov. Like, he's a very, very good fighter. Like, this dude beat Fedor Emelianenko in combat sambo, okay? When Fedor was on top of the world, this dude beat him in sambo, which is really its own version of MMA. Blagoy Ivanov nonetheless gets a unanimous decision win. It could have went either way. It was a very close fight. But De Lima is a kickboxing champion, okay? And he's knocked a lot of people out. And he hit Blagoy with a lot of shots. Not just a lot of shots, but a lot of combinations. And he landed them flush as they could land. He's a big dude. He's a powerful dude. He's got a lot of size to him. Huge legs, huge arms, huge torso. And he's actually pretty quick. Nonetheless, Blagojev has taken Junior Dos Santos's best shots for 5 rounds. He took Tai Tuivasa's best shots and beat him. He took Derek Lewis's best shots and arguably beat him. He lost that fight by a split decision, okay? Like, he might have the best chin in MMA history. Him and Max Holloway. So Carlos Condit, too. I'd say him. I mean, there's a lot of guys that have really great chins, but dude, Blagoy has got to be considered for that topic of discussion. He's got to be. He's now 3-3 in the UFC, 19-4 as a pro. Brandon Royval versus Matt Schnell. This was a really great fight. This was such a great fight while last night. I knew it was going to be, man. I told y'all Brandon Royval's as exciting as they come. He comes out, gets right in Schnell's grill, as he always does. A couple minutes into the fight, he gets dropped pretty badly. And Schnell jumps on a guillotine, which Royval gets out and then locks up a guillotine of his own and gets a submission win. This got fight of the night honors. I can see why, considering Charles Oliveira was not allowed to win a post-fight bonus. Otherwise, that definitely would have got fight of the night. But I'm glad to see Brandon Royval get an extra 50 grand. I love that kid. I'm super happy to see him get a finish, too. Like, I really, really love watching him fight. He's one of my favorite fighters. He has been since he beat Tim Elliott, and then especially when he beat Kai Kara France. Like, man, he's one to watch. Macy Chiasson absolutely dominated Norma Dumont. Norma, kind of like I said, Ray Cooper in the last video, kind of like I said, he just didn't show up against Carlos Leal. Norma didn't show up against Macy until like the latter stages of the 3rd round is when she started to land some hard punches. And she even stunned Macy and made her panic shoot a couple times, made her panic wrestle a couple times. But it wasn't enough. It was too little, too late. And Macy, this was a split decision. Macy got 2 30-27 cards, and Norma got the 29-28. Man, I was super upset because Norma's my favorite female fighter. Even though she's not necessarily a finisher, she's fun to watch. She's got good takedowns. She's got really good kickboxing. She's 6-time state champion in Sanda, 1-time national champion in Sanda, which is like kickboxing with takedowns. That's good for Macy, though. I've had high hopes for Macy ever since she came to the UFC. And we saw her rebound from her loss against Raquel Pennington beautifully on Saturday night. I'd like to see her stay at 145 for sure. Like, this is the weight class for her. Francisco Trinaldo and Danny Roberts, this was a really great fight. Trinaldo at 43 years old, man, and in one of the lighter weight classes, okay? He was a lightweight for most of his career. He moved up to welterweight like a year ago. Yeah, about a year ago to fight Muslim Salikov. Lost that fight by unanimous decision, then won his last 2 over Dwight Grant and Danny Roberts. Now, he's 5-1 in his last 6, kind of like Andrei Arlovsky. As I said, he's had a real remarkable career resurgence. So is Trinaldo. But Trinaldo never really lost it. He came to the UFC with a record of 10-1. He then climbed to 21-4, so that's 11-3 in the UFC. He lost to Kevin Lee, beat Jim Miller. Lost to James Vick, beat Evan Dunham. Lost to Alexander Hernandez in a fight most of us think he won. It was in Hernandez's backyard, and Hernandez really needed to win. So he was coming off a loss to Donald Cerrone. So the judges just handed it to him. So really, Trinaldo should be 7-1 in his last 8, but instead he's 6-2 in his last 8 and 5-1 in his last 6. Beating some good fighters in that time, like Bobby Green, John Makdessi, Jai Herbert, who he knocked out, Dwight Grant, who hasn't lived up to the hype, but is a very skilled talent, and Danny Roberts, again, hasn't quite lived up to the hype, but a very skilled talent. He's incredibly dangerous. He finishes everybody he beats. And this is actually Danny Roberts' first loss by a decision, because he's been finishing every one of his losses prior. Like, he either finishes the guy or gets finished. He's such an exciting fighter. And this fight showcased that, man. Trinaldo almost knocked him out so many times, but he couldn't quite do it. And he ends up getting the unanimous decision over. That was a great fight. If you didn't see it, go back and watch that one. Randy Brown and Chaos Williams. This was a good fight. Chaos hurt him twice, I believe, and dropped him. But Randy Brown used his length, and his defense is getting really good. I'll say that. Like, his footwork is great. His head movement is great. He's tall, long, and lanky. He's very long. Like, he's got a lot of skills. I had a lot of high hopes for him early on. He got finished pretty badly a couple times there, most recently by Vicente Luque. But, dude, he's really coming into his own at 31 years old, nearly 32. But he's Jamaican, so I got a feeling he's got a couple more years at least until he's in his physical prime. There's something to be said about Africans and Jamaicans. And, you know, not to sound racist, obviously, I know a lot of you are going to think it is, but black people, they're just athletic as fuck. Oftentimes their peaks come a little bit later, or at least they can extend their peak a little bit longer because of the gifts they have. But yeah, that was a really good win for Randy Brown. I was super happy to see it. And this is only Chaos Williams' second loss in the UFC. He's now 4-2 in the UFC. Ovince St. Preux versus Mauricio Shogun Hua 2. This fight absolutely sucked. I'll tell you that. Ovince beat him by a split decision. That's about all I need to say about that fight. And I'll say something about this too, because there are a lot of split decisions on this card. Not only that, but these judges were all over the fucking place on this card. Okay, all over the fucking place. Okay, we had a split decision between CJ Verga and Clayton Rodriguez earlier on. We had a split decision with Macy and Norma, which it was so clear who won that fight. Randy Brown and Chaos Williams. I mean, that makes a little more sense that it was a split decision, but I mean, Brown definitely won that fight. St. Preux and Shogun. The only time either of them really did anything was in the third round when St. Preux started landing some snap kicks to Shogun's body, keeping him at bay, keeping him from throwing anything. Shogun landed some nice leg kicks. That's about it. The co-main event, which we'll get into in a minute. But yeah, feature fight of the night came in the lightweight division between former multi-time Bellator lightweight champion Michael Chandler and former interim UFC lightweight champion Tony Ferguson, who could have very well become the undisputed champion at some point had he been given a shot. He won the interim belt and had to fight 2 more times after that, finished both Anthony Pettis and Donald Cerrone after that. Like, he should have got his undisputed title shot. Nonetheless, he's a former interim champion. A fight between 2 former champions. And Tony lost his last 3 straight after a 12-fight win streak. We all thought Chandler was just going to blow right through him, okay? And the result says he did. You go back and watch that fight, dude, Tony was on fucking point early on. Like, when he fought Gaethje, going into that fight, I was just like, dude, he's not going to beat Gaethje. Gaethje's too good. A lot of people were picking Tony to win that fight. I was like, really? Like, I don't care about his win streak. Look at the matchup. He's going to lose, and he got beat down for 5 rounds. Charles Oliveira never gave him a chance to get started. And then in his fight with Beneil Dariush, he just did not look good at all. He was not at all there. Like, he looked like shit against Beneil Dariush. Okay, and Beneil has a tendency to do that to his opponents, but Tony did not look like Tony. This fight, Tony looked like Tony. He looked incredible. He hurt Michael Chandler early on. He was tagging him up with his hands. He looked incredible. And then Chandler ends up shooting on a double, which he gets. Again, that's not really uncharacteristic of Tony's career. He's ended up on his, even though he's a national champion junior college wrestler, he does end up on his back sometimes. And Chandler remained on top for like the second half of the first round, raining down some ground and pound. At the end of the first round, Tony gets up. He's got a big smile on his face. He yells. He's like, yeah, buddy, it was great. And then 17 seconds into the second round, man, Michael Chandler lands a front kick from hell. And, man, it was one of the most brutal knockouts I've ever seen. I've watched the sport for a little over half my life now. It's one of the most brutal knockouts I've ever seen. It was so hard to watch that happen to someone like Tony Ferguson. And I predicted that would happen. I predicted Chandler would knock him out because I didn't think Tony was going to really look that great. But I didn't think it was going to be a front kick. I thought it would be one of his punches. He's so good at setting up his punches and switching stances in the middle of his combinations. And he's so explosive. Like, Michael Chandler's for real, man. He may have knocked out Dan Hooker and then lost 2 straight. Think about it. He almost beat Charles Oliveira, and he came very close to knocking Justin Gaethje out more than once in those 2 defeats. He comes back and gets another really devastating knockout win. And it makes me think, dude, because Tony showed us earlier on in that fight, like, he's not done like we thought he was. But if he wasn't done going into that fight, I think he might be done now. He was unconscious for at least 3 minutes, if not maybe even 4 or 5. Like, that was a bad knockout. And he's 38 years old. He was coming off a year-long layoff coming into this fight. I think Tony might be done. and he too has had one of the bigger falls from grace in the sport's history. It's sad to see, but Michael Chandler, I believe, has a little bit more of a future in the sport left in him. So I'm glad to see him get the win. But man, Tony has had one of the most unlucky careers in MMA history. And then the co-main event, this is one of the worst fights I've ever seen in my life, and I think you all would agree. It's a lot like Tyron Woodley versus Damian Maia, or Tyron Woodley versus Stephen Thompson 2, or Anderson Silva versus Damian Maia, or Anderson Silva versus Talis Latis. Notice Damian Maia is a part of 2 of those fights. Tyron Woodley's a part of 2 of those fights, and Anderson Silva is part of 2 of those fights. One of them, Anderson Silva, is one of the most exciting fighters of all time, but he just had 2 snooze fests. And this was a lot like that one, or those ones rather. Rose, I believe, won the fight. Like, she controlled 90% of this fight, but the biggest moments of the fight was when Carla took her down, I believe, twice. She took her back for a few seconds one of those times. But I believe Rose controlled most of this fight, and I do believe she won, but she didn't do enough. I'll just come on and say neither of these girls look good. Carla did not deserve to win the UFC championship with a performance like that, and Rose didn't deserve to retain the UFC championship with a performance like that. But it leads me to think, like, we need to see this trilogy. We need to see Rose not so gun shy. Like, I feel like that first fight might have got to her a little bit, and she didn't dare plant her feet and throw because she didn't want to get taken down. But I did notice something different. In that first fight, she came out throwing all sorts of kicks from her Taekwondo background. She was only 2-1 coming into that fight. She's a lot more experienced now. She's one of the better boxers in the sport now. So she had a more boxing centered game plan, but you got to engage at least like 3 or 4 times as much as that. Like, you're not clearly winning any rounds. Like, her defense was great and her footwork was great. Carla couldn't touch her, but dude, I can't believe that fight went like that. And Dana White was asked at the post-fight press conference, are you going to make this trilogy? And he's like, I don't think anyone's clinging to the gun to see that trilogy. And it's like, yeah, assuming it goes like the rematch did, yeah, but it kind of needs to happen though. Like, I don't know. And Rose was saying, like, I'm one of the most exciting fighters in the sport. I got one of the higher finishing rates. And she's right. Both points. She's right. And she's like, I can't have a strategic performance. And it's like, that was a strategic performance, but it was a strategic performance where she scored literally no points at all. Okay. She didn't do anything. And neither did Carla. It's one of the worst fights I've ever seen. And I still want to see the trilogy though, because I believe Rose is better. But considering Carla was able to take her down those couple times, even though Rose popped right back up, it leads me to believe if Rose would have planted her feet and thrown, she would have gotten taken down a couple more times. On the contrary, I feel like she could have hurt Carla if she planted her feet and threw more. So it's just one of those things. I think we need to see a third fight. I don't care how boring this one was. We need to see a third fight between these two. And it should probably happen sooner than later. Get it out of the way. Nonetheless, Carla Esparza is now a 2-time UFC Women's Strawweight champion, as was Rose. And then the main event between Charles Oliveira and Justin Gaethje. Man, it's so unfortunate that Charles couldn't walk away with the title, but this is exactly what I said in the preview. These are the 2 most dangerous guys in the sport. This is going to be an incredibly exciting fight, and neither of them can take each other's best for 5 rounds, let alone a couple. Like, this is going to be over by round 2 or 3 at the very latest. And that was, every one of those points was showcased in this fight, as Charles Oliveira submits him at 322 in round 1. Not before getting hurt badly, though. So something to be said about Charles Oliveira. He doesn't have that quit in him anymore. It's really weird. Like Joe Rogan said, it's one of those things you just have or you don't. You know, heart, like you're born with it or you're born without it. Charles Oliveira has shown us that's not true. Or it's at the very least a very subjective thing, because he got hurt by Kevin Lee, ends up submitting him in the 3rd round. Tony Ferguson, he mauled. That's the only person he wasn't able to finish in his last 11 wins. And that first round had 10 more seconds, he would have got the armbar. He was beat down viciously by Michael Chandler in the first round, comes back and knocks him out 17 seconds into the second. He got dropped by Dustin Poirier a number of times, submitted him in the 3rd round. And then Justin Gaethje drops him twice and hurts him badly. He was landing those leg kicks too. The one, I don't remember how many leg kicks in it was, but it buckled Charles' legs and he was like, oh shit. Like, you could tell that one really hurt. And yeah, dude, I noticed the second time he got dropped, though, it was a little bit of a delayed response because I think he was hurt, but it wasn't quite as bad as the first one. I think he saw it coming, but it just wobbled him a little bit. So he's like, he sits to his back, is able to regain his composure. He knows Gaethje isn't going to fall onto the ground. So he's able to get an extra 5 seconds and, you know, not be hurt anymore, recover. And it worked. He pulled guard. Gaethje stood right up out of it, but then Oliveira ends up landing that right hand again. Oh, yeah, he lands a right hand like 5 seconds in and stuns Gaethje badly. Like, this was one of the best one-round fights I've ever seen in my entire life. Anyways, he lands that right hand again and drops him. And he gets him, he takes his back, but Gaethje's arm is in a weird place. He doesn't quite have his back, so he gets him in an inverted triangle. Can't get it, and then he actually takes his back and sinks in the choke. Charles Oliveira is like the true Cinderella man of MMA. And through his career and in his fights. It's so cool to see. I really wish he had the belt. Like, he's the champion. He's the best lightweight in the world. Islam Makhachev might have something to say about that, but I was so happy to hear Joe Rogan, or Dana White rather, say that Joe Rogan told him, don't make Islam versus Beneil Dariush. Islam needs to fight Charles Oliveira for the vacant belt. And I couldn't agree more. That's exactly what needs to happen. So Charles Oliveira added to 2 of his streaks at UFC 274. He had the most finishes in UFC history, and he also had the most submission wins in UFC history. He adds to both of them. He now has 16 submission wins in the UFC, which is like 5 more than anybody else has ever done. And he has 19 finishes in UFC, also like 5 more than anybody has. It's incredibly impressive. He's the most dangerous fighter in the sport, man. His striking has gotten so good. Like, his striking has always been good. He's always had good fundamental Muay Thai, but now he really believes in it. Now he lets his hands go. He's got power. He's one of the most versatile strikers in the sport. And then, not to mention his ground game. Okay, so if he doesn't hurt you to get you to the ground, he's got one of the best body lock trips in the whole sport. Like, I'd say he's up there with Valentina Shevchenko for his body lock takedowns. He does it to just about everybody. And his jiu-jitsu is the very best in the sport. And his record with 16 submission wins in UFC history shows that. So, man, I wish I could have walked out with the belt. It's so fucked up that they did that to him. There's a number of other fighters that said they weighed in half a pound more than they weighed at the hotel's scales. And there was one other fighter to miss weight on this card, Norma Dumont. She also missed weight by 0.5 pounds. So, assuming those scales were correct, we got 2 people that missed weight. Assuming they were wrong, you got 2 people that shouldn't have missed weight and 1 person that should have just added a title defense to their resume on Saturday. So that's really fucked up. I hope they figure that out. That would be nice, because I think it's obvious Charles Oliveira is the champion. But something to be said about that too. This isn't the first time he's missed weight. However, it's the first time he's missed weight at 155 pounds. Nonetheless, he gets the first round submission over Gaethje. One of the most entertaining fights we've ever seen. If you haven't seen it, go back and watch it. Go to MMAshare.com. They post all the fights. And yeah, thank you all for watching. Have a good one.